Now that we have a better understanding of the request queries, let's create a game where we can exercise request queries and get a better understanding. We're going to use the numbers guess endpoint to create a game called the number guessing game. The object of the number guessing game is to guess a number between 1 and 15, and if we happen to guess it right, then we get a response back from the server saying that we won the game, or else we lose the game. The guess response, or sorry, the properties we'll be using in our queries will be the word guess, and the value must be a digit between 1 and 15. We can have multiple guesses, and we can only have no more than 3 guesses. So we can throw an ampersand, send guess equals 15, and guess equals another number. If you have more, we'll get a response back from the server saying that we have too many guesses. So let's get into our number guessing game. We have our endpoint number guess with a callback function. Now we must put in our method. Let's capture the queries object. Let queries equal rec.query. Once we get the object, we want to get the keys and the values from that object. Let keys equal object dot keys of queries. And let value or vals equal object dot values of queries. Now don't get confused when we say keys. This is the property. Another word for property would be keys, so just keep in mind that they both come hand in hand. Now once we get our keys and values, we want to get our array of numbers 1 through 15. Let numbers equal, we're going to instantiate a new array object, and in here we're going to start with the length of the array, 15. We will have to throw in a fill function to fill it up with an empty string. Once we do that, we're going to map this array of empty strings with x and index. In our map function, the argument x is not going to be used. We're just going to focus on the index. Now we can return our index, and indexes in arrays start with 0. It's a 0 base index. So it would, once we return this, it would show 0 through 14. But since we want to get 1 through 15, let's add this by 1. We can test this out by console.log numbers. Hit that endpoint. Once you reach the console, we get 1 through 15. Once we get 1 through 15, or the array of numbers, we have to extract a certain amount of numbers, but randomly generated numbers, and push that into a new array. So we're going to create a new array called generated random nums. Let random nums equal a function that's going to give us a new array of randomly generated numbers between 1 and 15. These numbers will not duplicate, so they should just show each unique value. We'll create a function called generate 5 nums, then we'll pass in the numbers array. After we do that, we must create a function for this. Const generate 5 nums equals our argument numbers, which returns a method to generate. Before we start our generation of numbers, let's get some variables. Let max equal 5. Let min equal 0. 5 represents pretty much the length of the array that should return once we finish the function, and 0 is going to deal with the iteration. Now once we get those variables, Let's add one more. Let random equal nothing. This random value is going to represent that in the iteration is going to represent the random value captured, and we will push that into a new array called r. So we're going to add a second argument to this function called r equals an empty array, defaulting it to an empty array. Since we're doing this, we must replicate that in the function that we call generate 5 nums. And since we don't have an r variable, we'll just say let r equal nothing. Now, since we have our random generate 5 nums function ready, let's go into the iteration with a while loop. While max is greater than min, we will start our iteration. Let's capture random. Random equals numbers. In our numbers array, we must capture a random value. It doesn't have to be the first one, and it doesn't have to be the last one, but we have to find a method to capture the random value. To do this easily, let's add math.floor, math.random, click to the right, and we're going to multiply math.random, or a number between 0 and 1. We'll multiply this by the numbers array, the length of the numbers array. Since we have this, let's not push anything into our r yet. First, we don't want to do duplicate values. If r dot includes random, if r, this array already has a random value, the random value that we're capturing, then that means it's a duplicate. So what we need to do is recapture the random value and say random equals numbers and the method to capture a random value. And then we'll say r, actually no, we'll leave it as is. Else statement, we can say r dot push random. If the value is unique and it doesn't already exist in this r array, then we just say r dot push random. Go right in there. Once we push it into the r, we'll decrement the iteration by 1. And what I mean by that is we have this max value of 5. Right now, when we do all of this, this is representing the number 5, or like the first step out of 5, but until we get to 0. So we can say max minus minus, or max minus equal 1. So until we get to 0, we should return the array. And once we return, let's test the function. Console.log random nums. And we'll console out the 1 through 15. Let's hit that endpoint again. Now we get a randomly generated numbers of 5 items. We have 3, 2, 13, 10, and 5. Let's do this a few more times to validate, to test if we get any duplicates. Huh, that's interesting. Is it printing 3 times? No, it's only printing once. Okay, so as you can see, the more we hit this, we get a new array coming down the line, and it looks like we're not getting any duplicates. Let's do this 5 more times. Great, so we don't have any duplicates. This function is working. Now we can move on to the next step. And the next step is going to be a little bit more complex, but this really is a significant step to securing your application and tailoring it for its purpose, for literally just the game. So what I mean is we're going to create some checks, some Boolean functions here to check if anything is wrong with the game. The first check we will go through is going to be invalid property. So let's start with const invalid prop equals a function, and this function is going to check if we have a property other than guess. It could be goo, it could be IDK, it could be hacking, but we really want to fix this to say guess, and if anything else is that in there but guess, then we'll throw an error or a response to the client. Let's go on with our function and test. This will be check invalid prop with an argument of the keys, because that represents the property. Now let's create this function check invalid prop right below this function. Const check invalid property equals, we'll pass in one argument, which is keys, and this is going to return a method to check invalid property. Now, for the method, we are going to return a single line return, and it's going to look like this. Return. Now, when we return, we're going to return a truth or false statement, and that's our goal with this check invalid property function. Let's send or return the keys array, and we're going to send keys.length. This should equal to 1, because when we access our request queries from the last video, when you're requesting, you can request more than one query or property. Guess equal 2 and guess 2 equals 5. But let's say if we added the same word, guess, which matches the first query, then that would come into one instance of the object. Once that becomes one instance of the object, we are going to get an array of values, 2 and 4. So it would show up as an array. Now, if the keys, it shows up as 1, that's exactly what we want, because we don't want any other properties within our endpoint for the query. We just want guess, and we want up to 3 guesses. Okay, so with that being said, let's test and continue with our condition. If keys.length equals 1 and keys 0 is equal to guess. Let's go over the second condition. The second condition is saying if the keys array, which we have in here, if the first instance, the first item within the array, which is 0 base index, keys of 0, if it equals guess, then we don't have an issue. We are good to go and nothing's invalid. If anything else other than, this is pretty much reinforcing the first check, and it's reinforcing it in the most positive way, saying, okay, we're already saying keys.length should equal 1. If it doesn't, this won't even get read. It just stops here. So this really reinforces it to get this key to show up as only guess. Now, let's go on with our third and final condition for this function, and we're going to check to see if our property is a function and we don't even know it. So if we want to test to see if the property is a function, we'll send a regex. If dot test, all right, if the type of key, which is guess, right, which should be guess, which reinforces both of these conditions, if the word function tests positive for guess, if it tests positive for the type of item, which should be a string, then something's wrong. The application will throw an error from the server to the client saying, check your properties, because someone's trying to hack your stuff in the object, and we don't want that in our application. Now that we have all 3 conditions, we're going to return true, and false. So let's go over this one more time. Const check invalid prop equals the keys array. Return the keys array dot length. Return the length of the keys and check if it's greater than 1. If it doesn't equal 1, we're going to throw an error. If it's nothing or if it's more than 1, then we're going to throw an error. But if it equals 1, if we have one property within our, or one instance within the object queries, we should be good to go. Let's move on to the next condition. Keys of 0. Keys of 0, if it equals guess, if these keys, if the first item in the keys array and the only item reinforced by the first condition, if it equals guess, then we should be good to go. If it doesn't, we will throw an error to the client and have them check their properties. And our final condition is if the type of key is not a function, we are good to go. But if it is a function, if something happened in that property, if it just became something else, then we are going to throw an error. We're going to say true. So if any of these conditions do work, then we'll send a false statement. And the reason why we are sending a false statement is because we are arguing against check if the property is invalid. Hence the name, check invalid prop. If it's true, then we are implying that the property is invalid, therefore throwing a truthy value for this function. So if it does match any of those conditions, if all these conditions are matched together, then we'll say false, there's no problem, or else we'll throw a true. There is a problem. Now that we have our check invalid props function ready, we can console.log to the console. Invalid prop. Now let's go to the endpoint in the browser and let's look at our list of guesses. We have guess equals 2, guess 2 equals 5, and guess equals 4. So we should get an error just because this guess 2 does equal 5 and it's not valid. Like it's actually not cool. Like, why are you in here? Why do you look like that? Why aren't you guess, right? And we actually have two instances in our query object, meaning we have the guess property, which matches guess at the end. That is one instance. And the second instance, or the second property in the array of keys, is guess 2. That should also throw an error, so we should get a true statement saying, yeah, there's something wrong with your application. Else, we get false, and that's what we want to show that so far the application is running fine. Now let's hit the endpoint and test this out. We should get true. And we get true. Let's correct the problem. Take out guess 2 equals 5 and the extra ampersand. Now we have guess equals 4 and guess equals 2, which shows one instance or one property or one item in the array of keys. That's literally one item. Else, we will get a true statement saying something is wrong. Let's hit that endpoint again, and we get false because, again, we have one instance or one item in the array of keys. The first item in the array of keys is guess, which makes sense. And we're testing to see if it's a function, which it's not. It's really a string. So we get false. Now that we know this, we're going to go over our check invalid values and see if it's a digit, and yeah, we'll just go from there. But keep this method in mind just to check for certain values, because what we did here is we really fixed our condition to say if 1, 2, and 3 matches, if this works with our application, then just send false. Just say don't worry, it's cool. Or send true, because something is wrong, something is off with one of these conditions. Now, let's go into consoling this out. And we can set up another Boolean check. Another Boolean check we'll use, like we said, it will be the value. Const invalid val equals check invalid value. So when we check the values, you can already guess we are going to use the values property, which is an array of values. This should match 4 and 2 and so forth, how many instances we have in our query. Copy check invalid value, take it to the top, and we're going to go under check invalid prop and say const check invalid value equals the vals array, which returns a method to check if we have an invalid value. Perfect. So I'm really glad we have this check invalid prop above us, because it's going to give us more motivation to complete this function for how we're going to do the method. To check the invalid value, again, when I have my values, I want to make sure that they are digits and they are nothing else but digits. As well, actually, we'll just keep it there. I just want to check if they're a digit, okay? So let's go ahead and return vals array dot filter, sorry, I don't know why I'm filtering here, dot every. So we're saying in the values array, which can have more than one value, dot every value in the array, we want something to happen. We want to throw a truthy or a falsy value. So we'll represent that with val and index. I don't think we'll be using index, but we'll just keep it there to be safe. And just like the top, where we're checking to see if the property is a function, which it shouldn't, we can check to see if the value is a function, which it shouldn't be as well. As long as the type of val is not a function. All right, and we'll throw, let's do this again. For every value in the array of vals, as long as val or the value is not a function, as long as it's a string, a number, like one of those two besides a function, because that can be dangerous. We'll throw an and to set another condition, and vals dot every, so every value in the array of vals, val and index, will return to see if the value is a digit. If it's anything else but a digit, then we'll throw an error. Let's say starting with and ending with, we'll do a reject. So starting with and ending with a digit, /d and plus to show that it can be a 10, 11, 12, it can hold 2 characters or at least more than 1 character in the digit. Then we can test val. So we're only testing the value, not the type of value, because we're testing the value itself to see if that is a digit and not a number, not a asterisk, not a percent sign, or we just want it to be a number. Now, we only have 2 conditions in this function, so let's go over it again. Check invalid value with an array of vals, which represent the numbers here, 4 and 2. We can add another one, guess equals 3. 4, 3, and 2. We're going to return a true or false statement if the values array, or if every value in the array, or if any value in the array, if every value in the array is not a function, then we are safe. We are good to go, and we can move on to the next condition. If every value in the array is a digit, then we are good to go as well. So this is the power when it comes to really fixing your conditions, especially with an and. If we were to use an or operator, this would throw our application off whack because it's going to check for too many things simultaneously. So let's keep it at an and to keep it at a fixed condition check. Now, if both conditions meet, we will say false, meaning there's no problem with the application, continue and don't worry about me. Or else true, there is problem with the application and we need to worry. Now that we have this condition set, or this function set to check the invalid value, let's put it to the test. Console.log invalid val. Again, this invalid value, I'm expecting it to show false. Based off of our endpoint, we have all digits as values, right? And we didn't create these values as functions. We didn't make them a function. So let's go ahead and send the endpoint, and it should show false. Oh no, it shows true. What happened? Check invalid value, return vals.every. Let's keep it at just vals. Val index and function.test type of val. Okay, and vals.every val, which returns a digit or more digits dot test val. And if any of these conditions meet, as long as it's a digit and it's not a function, if every single one is not a function, we should be good. What happened? Let's hit the endpoint again. Guess. No. All right. We're saying if any of these meet, send. Sorry, I think I did mess up here. So let's switch these here from false to true and true to false. So we're saying if these conditions, if it's not a function and if it is, if every value is a digit, then send. No, we'll say false because we don't want to have a problem. So what's happening in my application? Let's backtrack. Console.log invalid val, check. Oh, I think I know. So one correction we can do here, we can check to see how are the values showing up, because I can already guess just from visualizing, we have multiple values in this array. So let's console.log vals. It's already going to be an array, and we are getting it from the object.values, which puts it in an array. So just from guessing it, I believe that the values, if we have more than one guess, property and value, it's going to be in an array within an array. So let's test that out. And I'm right. We get an array within an array. So to fix this, all we have to do is go to the vals variable, and at the end of the object.values, we just have to say dot flat. And dot flat should flatten our array from double array to one array. Great. And at the same time, we do get a false statement. So let's go over that one more time. Check invalid value equals vals. Okay, we're going to check to see if the vals array is a digit and each value is not a function. If one of them is a function or a digit, then we are going to test true, saying there is something wrong with this function, there's something wrong with the application, and there's ultimately something wrong with the value. Before you even get into that function, just notice your values and how the values, the object.values really works, because when you get multiple values, it's going to create an array instance and put that into an array. If we were to test this with a single instance, say guess equals 2, then we just get 2. Even without the flat, take the flat away for now and put it up. We get 2 in a single array instance because it just shows up as 2, not an array, just 2, or just one item. So now that we have invalid props and invalid values set, let's console this out, and let's move on to our next Boolean check. The next Boolean check is going to be about how many guesses can we have in our endpoint. Can we have just one? Can we have just two? Can we have just three, or maybe more than three? For this application and for the tutorial, we're only going to have up to three guesses. So yes, you can use one guess, two guesses, or three, but anything more than three, we should throw an error from the browser or from the server to the client. So let's clear that endpoint for now. Keep the question mark, and we're going to go into creating this check to see if there's too many guesses. Const too many guesses equals check too many guesses. And in our guesses, all we really need here is just the values to test if we have more than one value. Because if you try to use the keys, it's not going to work, because we are already testing to see if the property is one instance. We don't want more than one, so this wouldn't really make sense to check against how many guesses. If we want to make more sense of that, let's use the vals or values array of vals, and don't forget to put that dot flat back, because that's really crucial to using multiple values. Check too many guesses, and we'll copy this function, bring it under check invalid value, const check too many guesses equals vals, which returns a method to check if we have more than three guesses. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and return our condition. This condition is real small, so just take your time with it. Since we have an array of values or an array of one value, and it's not doubled up, it's actually flattened, what we want to do here is return we're going to return a condition that should be falsy. Return a condition that's falsy for the value's length is less than or equal to 3. At the same time, and values.length is greater than 0. So this is saying as long as if we test positive for something wrong, if this falsy value tells us, yeah, the value's length is greater than 3 or it's less than 0, if it shows up as -1, -2, anything under 0, then we should get a truthy value. And that's pretty much it. You can say question mark true, or else if it's fine, if we're in between the parameters of 3 and 0, then we should say false. But in this case, you don't have to say you don't have to use a ternary operator. You can just leave it as is, because we're just testing to see if this, with the exclamation point, if this is a falsy value. Now that we have this to check too many guesses, let's use this to our advantage by console.log too many guesses. Now, to check if we have too many guesses, we obviously have to put more than 3 guesses. So let's try one guess to see if we receive anything. Guess equal 1, and this should throw a falsy value. Cool. So we don't have too many guesses yet. Once it hits true, then we will have too many guesses. And guess equal 5 and guess equal 12. Now that we have 3, let's test it out. We get false, so we're still good. But what if we add one more? Guess equal 4. And we get true, because we have more than 3 guesses within our Boolean function, check too many guesses. So if we check too many guesses and we have more than 3, we should get a response back from the server, too many guesses, try again. Now that we have too many guesses Boolean check situated, let's go into one more Boolean check here. this will determine to see if any value within our guesses that are up to 3 is between 1 and 15. So if there's a value that is less than 0 or greater than 15, we should throw a truthy value. If it's not, then we throw false, symbolizing that we are good to go with the application, and we should check to see if we won or lost. So let's create that function. Const check out of scope. So the variable we're using is check out of scope, or check if the variable is out of scope, the value, and this will be a function check out of, you know what, I should use this as a function. This will be out of scope. So out of scope equals check out of scope function, and what we're going to pass as the argument is going to be the values, because that's what it has to deal with, the values, not the properties, just the values. Now copy this function, bring it up top under too many guesses. We'll say const check out of scope equals the vals, which equals a method to check if numbers are out of scope. When we check to see if this number is out of scope, we're going to check, and again, the values, whether it's one item or whether it's many items, they are going to show up in one array, because one, it's we're capturing it from the values object function, and we are flattening this or reinforcing it to say, yeah, even if it's an array, we just want to make it one array of items. Now, let's go into our return. Return vals, and we're going to filter our vals out. So let's filter val, which returns, let's see. When you're returning this val, I want you to keep this value in mind. When you want the data type, right now the data type is a string. We saw that many times before. If you go to the console, we have our array of strings or array of values, and if they were numbers, they wouldn't really have these quotations on the end of them. So they are showing up as strings. Now to convert them from strings to a number, which is really crucial to this test, we can do this. We can simply add a plus sign in front of val. This is saying, let's convert you from a string to a number. And as long as val is less than 1, or val is greater than 15, then we can filter these out into a new array. And this is negative here. So again, we're returning a filtered array of values. If these values happen to be less than 1, less than 1, or greater than 15, then we're just going to say, all right, let's filter them out. Let's get that array of bad apples. We can get the length of that and say, as long as the length is greater than 0, which it shouldn't be if we're trying to be positive here and win the game, then if it's greater than 0 in this scope, then we're going to throw a truthy value. And that's all it does. Question mark true or else false. So let's go over this one more time. We're creating a function to check the scope of values, and we want to make sure that these values are between 1 and 15. We are returning values and filtering the values array. We'll return a statement saying, as long as the value is less than 1 or greater than 0, which is what we don't want, then push that into the array and give me the length. If that length is greater than 0, that's telling me you have some values that need to be checked, because they aren't working for you, and they are out of the scope. It's not 1, it's not 2, it's definitely not 15. So go ahead and check that again with true, or else we get false. In hindsight, since you're doing it like this is a truthy, this is a condition. So we can leave it as is. Now, let's copy our variable out of scope, and let's console.log out of scope to see if we get false, because that's what we want. So go to the endpoint, and we have guess equal 1. Since it equals 1, we should get a false value. Let's test it out. Cool, we get a false value. Let's say if we put in -1, we get a true value because it's converting this -1 into a number, making it actually negative, like an actual -1, which signifies that the -1 is less than 1, pushing that into our array of values. It's filtering it out to make sure that we are capturing this. And since the array is greater than 0, the length, then we are going to send true. And that's what we don't want. Let's do this with multiple values. Guess equals 5, so that should be correct. And guess equals 255. We get true. So it's showing that 255 is not the correct, it's out of the scope, and it's not between 1 through 15. If we used 15, we're getting false because both values are between 1 and 15. We can use 16 just to really test that test case. And we get true since the number falls outside of 15. So this is the power of checking the scope within your application. And we should be good to go from here with our checks. So let's console.log, or let's comment this out, and we can move on to making the game work. So when we make this game work, we want to start with the most negative condition and end up with the most positive. So starting out, we'll say if queries exists and if queries has its own property of guess. So that's already one thing we can do here. If queries dot has own property of guess, then we will continue. Or sorry, if it doesn't, then we will end it here and say res.send no properties listed. Else we're going to continue because we have guess listed. And when we continue, we'll say we're going to check the invalid property. If invalid prop and invalid value, if we have, sorry, invalid val, if both invalid prop and invalid value are not making sense, if the value's not a number, if the property's not guess, then we can send res.send invalid property and value, since they both make sense and match together. Else if just invalid prop. So what if we only get invalid prop but the value's fine? Then we can res.send invalid prop. And you can already guess else if invalid val. Then we're going to send invalid value. And we'll end this off here with an else statement. Within this else statement, we're going to check if we have too many guesses because, one, we already checking for the property and value. And the else ifs really just reinforce this if statement here. Now, when we send this else statement, this is saying continue. Now we're going to check if we have too many guesses or too many properties listed in our queries. if too many guesses, then we will send too many guesses. Cool. Else if the application or the values happen to be out of scope, if it's a number less than 1 or greater than 15. So else if the values are out of scope, then we can send values are outside of 1 and 15. Try again. And we can close this off here with an else statement. And before we get into this here, we're just going to say check lose. I'm going to go over what just happened. Now, we created all of these Boolean checks just to check if our application meets certain parameters with the property and with the value, as well as the property's length. So, do we have one key? Do we have many keys? Or else we're going to throw an error. Is the value actually a digit? Yes or no? If not, we're going to throw an error. So we did these Boolean checks here, and we're just going to go down the line. If queries.has own property of guess, if this exists, then we're going to, if this doesn't exist, which is symbolized by the exclamation point, then we'll send res.send no properties listed. Else, if the property is invalid and the value is invalid, we'll send a response, the invalid property and value. Else if we only have an invalid property, but the value is valid, then we'll say invalid property. Else if invalid val, invalid value. If we happen to negate all of these conditions, if there's no issue with the application once we get to these conditions, then we want to continue on to the next tier and say else. Let's continue with our checking. Let's see if anything else could be wrong. If too many guesses, then we'll say too many guesses. Else if the number is out of scope or the value, if it's less than 1 or greater than 15, then we're going to say values are outside of 1 and 15. Try again. And then for the else, we have a final check to check if we lost the game. And that's the last check we really have to do, because if we don't lose the game, we end up winning the game, right? There isn't a between. So let's continue on with our else statement. Let's see, if game lost. So we're going to set up a game loss function with 2 arguments, the values and the random numbers. And if we happen to lose the game, we'll say res.send you lost. Try again. You know what? We'll say res.json. In our res.json, we can enhance this response by throwing an object of message you lose, try again. And in our object, we'll add a nums property to give us the random nums. That way we can see if we really lost, if we really won. Like it gives us the ability to check what happened. Else, if we happen to win the game, then we just send a winning response, because we're going to check against all these values and see if at least one of them, or if all of them, don't match anything in the array. So you win if you win. And we will keep this nums property just to check to see if we really won. Now, once you have all this done, let's set up our game lost function. Let's go right under check out of scope within the list of functions here. Const game lost equals those 2 arguments, vals and randoms, or the random list of numbers in your array. that array of 5 items. This will return a method to check if we lost the game. And for this method, we're going to really take advantage of the every function, and I'll show you what that looks like. So let's say return an iterated array of random values, so randoms, which is that 5 items of randomly generated values that we have to compare against, dot every function. And in this function, we just really need one value. We'll need random, which returns, it's going to represent each random value in that array of 5. So in that iteration, we can say return. Now we're going to return vals or values. Dot every val, which returns every value in the values array. So right now we're returning every random value in the random array of 5, and we're returning every value that we're using from our values, from our query object. We're using 5 and we're using 16. And we're comparing that against that list of 5 randomly generated numbers in randoms array. Now let's take val is not equal to random. If all values are, if each value is not equal to, in the values array, is not equal to any value in the random array, we should throw a truthy response saying that we lost the game. So let's test this out. We have our function set up here, and we've already gone through our checks. We've already checked it up. We are good to go. No issue with the application. So let's go ahead and hit this endpoint and say guess equals 2, and let's just keep it there. Now we want to check to see if we have 2 within the array of 5 in the randoms array to symbolize if we win the game or not. We're gonna hit that endpoint and it looks like we win, but we don't have 2 in our number or in our response. So what we need to do here is return val not equal to random. So now that we have our guesses listed, let's guess a number between 1 and 15. If we get it right, then we win. If we get it wrong, we lose. We have 1 and 4. And so far we win. Let's try it again. We win because we have 1 listed. We win again, we have 1 listed. And we lose. So when we lose, you can see that 1 and 4 is not listed within our array of random numbers. Let's add another property to our query. Guess equals 15. We can test for 1, 4, and 15 to see if we win the game. We win because we get 4. We win because we get 4 again. We get 15 and 1, so we win. And now we lose because we don't have 15, 1, or 4 listed in our array. So you can see that we are winning and losing the game based off of probability, and it seems to be working fine. What if I wanted to use a number that was outside of 1 and 15? Let's say 100. We get a response from the server saying values are outside of 1 through 15, and that's because of this check too many guesses function. It's checking to see if the values.length is less than 3 and greater than 0 on a false aspect. So if it purposely does not, that's what this exclamation point means. If it purposely does not meet this condition, then throw a truth statement. So we didn't meet the condition here. Let's send another one. Let's correct this to 12 and go back, we win because we get 1 and 4. And let's set the first argument or the first variable to -25. We get an invalid value, and that's thanks to this check invalid value function to check if the number is a digit. Actually, no, it's thanks to yeah, it is thanks to this number. If it's a digit and a function.test, yeah, it's an invalid value, so it should be good to go because we're not signifying a negative statement. We're not saying a hyphen or anything in front of this digit, so it's going to show up as an invalid value, which takes care of the check out of scope function. So to fix that issue, to check that this is out of scope, here's what we can do. So we say guess equals -25 and guess equals 4. So in that case, let's say guess equals 2. Or you know what? We'll put a hyphen in front of the D. If it doesn't start with, or if it does start with a negative, which is conditional with a question mark, and it goes into the digit, then we should be able to pass this function and not throw an invalid value. Let's test it again with the -25. In theory, we are planning to get the check out of scope function to check our values and try again. Perfect. So with the -25, we're getting the correct error message by saying, all right, your digit's fine, but we got to check the values to see if they're between 1 and 15. And clearly it's not, so we're taking care of that check. Let's say if we mess up a property and use one S instead of 2 S's for guess, then it should stop us at the property is invalid. And we get invalid prop. Perfect. Now, let's go and play this game one more time the right way and see if we can win. We'll start with 1, property and value, guess equals 6. Hit that endpoint. Guess equals 6. We lose because we don't get 6 in the array. Hit the endpoint again, we lose. Hit it again, we win. We get number 6.